Even more new Rise of Shadow cards, Paladin Legendary, Warlock Legendary, and a new Mage card that might hammer its opponents.
Hey buddy, watch this.
Yep, we have lots of cards to talk about, so I may go a little faster than normal this time around. That said, still going to have the quick reviews link in the description for those without a lot of time who just want to see the cards and my 5-star ratings. Otherwise, let's jump into the detailed reviews. So up first here, let's talk about Commander Rhyssa, a new Paladin Legendary minion, 3 mana, 4/3. Your secrets trigger twice. Now, I have played this card in person. I do want to clarify how it works. It's not like Twin Spell where your secret hangs around after being cast. It triggers twice. So once it goes off, say you play Repentance, it will turn the enemy minion's health to 1 twice. So it basically won't work with things like Repentance or Auto Defense Matrix. It's not like you're getting to play an extra version of it. It'll just do the same thing twice in a row. So Noble Sacrifice will summon 2 2/1 minions. So that one works pretty well. Things like the new secret Never Surrender will give your minions 4 health instead of 2. So that one works insanely well. And after playing this card a fair bit at the Blizzard Summit, I thought she was pretty good. Often those sort of Never Surrender style plays became very powerful because you just get these sticky little boards that are even harder to deal with, and that helps keep Commander Rhyssa alive as well. So she kind of supports herself. If she's staying alive through all these different various means, you can start to combo out some pretty powerful things. Secret Paladin's already a deck that works really well. It's not losing most of its core secret synergy cards, so I think she's going to slot in nicely and help empower that archetype early in the Rise of Shadows meta. I think this card is going to be strong. She's very influential on the board early, so to me, looks like a strong inclusion. So now let's move on to Fel Lord Betrug, as I'm calling him, not Betrug, the new Warlock Legendary minion, 8 mana, 5/7 demon. Whenever you draw a minion, summon a copy with Rush that dies at the end of turns. We've seen a lot of these like draw a minion, something happens style cards in the past. Think about like Chromagus, for instance, as an example. That's a pretty similar stat line and mana cost. The difference, of course, with Chromagus is that you got the resource advantage extra, whereas with Fel Lord Betrug, you're going to get a tempo on board advantage. And I think that's considerably better than a card like Chromagus because you get to put those stats into play immediately as opposed to having to spend additional mana on them. You can help clear your opponent's board. There are these sort of big swing turn opportunities with cards like the Solarium where you can, draw 3 things at once. Maybe you get 3 minions. They all get summoned as copies, and you can take a big trade into your opponent's board. That's like the best case scenario for this card. I think the challenge, unfortunately, though, is that with Solarium, that's 2 legendary cards. Getting that combo to line up perfectly, getting the minions you want out of it is going to be kind of a difficult thing to line up. And then beyond that, like, it's still not that crazy of a play. Like, it's maybe a bit of a swing turn, right? It's not like it's a game-winning sort of endeavor. So, best case scenario, I think this card's, like, good. And most of the time, it's going to be far more inconsistent, and it's not going to work as well. Yes, occasionally, just playing Betrug, life tapping into like a Cairn or some cool Death Rattle minion, or maybe even like Dr. Morrigan could set up a neat little board state, right? But it's still not going to feel amazing to me. I think the upside on this card is when it lives for multiple turns, and because it's such an expensive card, it's not that difficult to deal with. I don't think it's going to live for multiple turns often, and I just don't think there's going to be that much upside to it. So I think it's got a cap on how much it can achieve, and it still has some consistency issues keeping it back. So for me, Betrug's going to fall a little bit short. I think it'll be interesting to try. Maybe things like Solarium get there, but probably not. So now let's talk about the new Hecklebot here. We have the new Dirty Rat of the expansion. Sort of. It's a 4 mana 3/8 mech, which could be important. It has Taunt, which is nice, and a battle cry that reads your opponent summons a minion from their deck, not from their hand, which I admittedly misread originally, but that's a big distinction, right? Because Dirty Rat was great at disrupting combo decks that would like keep these combo pieces in their hand. That you could play Dirty Rat at the right moment, you could pull out their combo piece. Because this is pulling from the deck, it's going to be far harder to grab specific sorts of things, and combo decks tend to keep combo pieces in their hand, whether in the mulligan or just because they accrue them over the course of the game. They're trying to get the combo pieces out of their decks. The odds of you hitting the exact right thing out of their deck, I think, are going to be slimmer. You might just pull out like a card draw minion or something, right? That could be a challenge. So I don't think this has the consistency as a disruptor of Dirty Rat. That said, it still can disrupt. It can provide some advantage in fatigue scenarios where you like pull stuff out of their deck so they fatigue faster. It's just a big body on a 4 mana taunt. Like, that's really good in and of itself against aggro decks. And against aggro decks, this is actually better than Dirty Rat, I would argue, because usually aggro decks are playing the low cost minions from their hand very quickly and early. And if you play Dirty Rat on like turn 4, turn 5, turn 6 against an aggro deck, you'd get maybe something more medium size or even big because they played all their low cost stuff. Hecklebot is the other way around. They might have more low cost stuff in their deck because they tend to run a lot of low cost minions. They're just going to be more likely to hit a low cost minion in the deck than a high cost minion. So you're not going to get punished as much for summoning something from their deck. So clearly a card that has still some tech applications, some anti-aggro applications, maybe some mech applications in Warrior in particular as a big defensive card. So I don't think it's as amazing as Dirty Rat or as important as Dirty Rat, but it's still a solid card that can see some degree of play. So now let's move on to the Muck Morpher, a 5-mana 4/4 for Shaman with Battlecry. Transform into a 4/4 copy of a different minion in your deck. So here a card that's kind of like a Shadow Essence almost for Priest, but on a minion body instead, a little bit cheaper. And, you know, as we've seen with Shadow Essence, that works best when you grab things with really cool effects, like some big crazy Death Rattle effect, some, Malagos style effect where you're going to be able to, elicit the value out of it while using it as a much lower cost way to do that. So you get a Malagos for 5 mana, right? That's kind of cool. And there might be some sort of Malagos combo deck that's enabled by the Muck Morpher. That's a possibility. I don't think it's going to be that likely, but it's there. Beyond that, you could just use this as sort of a value bomb card, running a lot of good minions in your deck and trying to get their effects in play. That's probably going to look like Death Rattles, for instance. That's a possibility. All that said, I don't think Shaman can use this as well as like Priest with big Priest stuff, right? Because, reviving this is not something Shaman's going to be able to do nearly as well. There are some evolve potentialities where if it copies itself, it becomes a 9-mana card or 8-mana card or 10-mana card. It becomes better to evolve. So there is potentially that big Shaman evolve sort of thing, but there's not that many evolve cards outside of lackeys right now. So where does it go? I don't know exactly how you want to play this card right now, but it's one of those things that does something so cool and so specific and so unique that there's probably going to be some way to figure this card out eventually, whether that's a combo deck or just some value thing. Muck Morpher has the potential to find a home in some kind of deck. So moving on, we have another Shaman guy here. It's the Sludge Slurper, a 1-mana 2/1 Murloc with a battle cry that reads, add a lackey to your hand, overload 1. So when I first looked at this card, I thought, well, from an efficiency standpoint, it's kind of a 2-mana 2/1 because of that overload. Lackeys are worth more than 1 mana, but maybe don't make up the difference here for the overload. So at best, it sort of felt like a neutral efficiency style card from a cost standpoint. But as I realized, the Sludge Slurper has a lot of potential synergies going for it. Battlecry synergies, Lackey synergies, Overload synergies, and Murloc synergies. And when you think about it that way, there might just be a deck that wants to use 1 or 2 of those synergies, and because Sludge Slurper is such a cheap way to do that, it could work really nicely. So an Overload deck, for instance, this is a very cheap, efficient Overload card. It's a great, cheap way to generate Lackeys. The Lackey is something that you can play on curve on turn 2 to keep that Overload in check. I don't know how good of a play that's going to be most of the time. Some Lackeys will certainly feel better than others. Not all Lackeys are going to be more of a board focus sort of thing. Think about like the Discover Lackey. That one's not going to Discover a spell Lackey is not going to really help you build a good early board, but the summon a 2-drop Lackey would be great if you're trying to go hyper aggressive. So it just depends on what the deck needs, but because it has so many different ways to go, probably somebody's going to like it. I don't think it's going to be a staple. I don't think it's going to be everywhere in Shaman, but this is the kind of card that will serve some sort of utility along the way and see some play. So up next here, we have Crystal Power for Druid, a new choose 1 that's going to play nicely with the Steladris legendary for Druid. It's all about choose 1 effects. It can either deal 2 damage to a minion or restore 5 health. So I like this card. In a vacuum, it's good. And when you look at cards that we're going to talk about here in a second, like Crystal Stag, I think it gets even better. But we've seen, this kind of 2 damage ping style thing work well with Holy Smites and Arcane Shots and all those different options. Now this one can only hit minions, so it's a little different than those, and even Living Roots, it's not going to be a combo enabler with Malagos or anything like that, but it is just one of those, keep something early in check if you need to, or if you need to heal 5 health, like you've got that option as well. Now neither of those are great cards in their own right, but the flexibility gives you a little bit to work with. Synergies with Steladris give you a little bit to work with. And healing, we can see with cards like Crystal Stag, gets a lot better too, because you can get a couple extra big bodies on board over the course of a game with something like Crystal Power healing you. So when you combine all those different elements together, I think this looks like a neat little flexible option for Druid that's just going to help them line up a couple different survivability options and maybe some big mid-game turns with Crystal Stag. So I think Crystal Power looks like a solid little card. It's not going to win games on its own. It's not a deck-defining piece by any means, but it's just got a lot of utility. Much like the past few cards we've talked about, that means it's probably going to see some play. So moving on, let's talk about the Crystal Stag, another Crystal Synergy card here. 5 mana 4/4 beast with Rush, and the battle cry reads, if you've restored 5 health this game, summon a copy of this. So Crystal Power kind of immediately sets up your Crystal Stag. As long as you're able to heal something, you got to take a little damage, which Druid can be okay with doing because of its hero power. There are other cards like Crystallizer, which make that possible, but a heal Druid thing could be a reality because Crystal Stag is really, really good if that battle cry goes off. Getting 2 4/4s with Rush for 5 mana is a ridiculously strong play. Helps you take quick trades. You have some decent minions left over probably. That's a lot of stats. Even if you don't take the Rush plays, just 2 4/4s for 5 is a really solid sort of board development. So it's going to be worth it to try to heal 5 health, I think. Also important that 5 health doesn't have to be to your hero. Can be to minions, so you can still play to the board. Lots of neutral healing options in the game, as we've seen heal Zoo in the past. Now, I don't know exactly what the deck would look like. It's probably not a Zoo deck so much as maybe like a mid-range deck, or maybe this is just a nice board swing kind of play in a control deck even, but the possibilities are there for Crystal Stag because it's a really strong card. And importantly, I don't think it's terrible as a 5 mana 4/4 with Rush. Even if the battle cry is not active, there are still going to be scenarios where that feels like an okay sort of play where you just maybe get a trade and hang a minion around for 5 mana. Like, you're not going to feel awful sometimes if you play that. So I like that fact too. Like, you don't have to make this work to make it good. You're going to want to. You're not going to run it in the deck if you don't have the heal synergies. But if things backfire, you don't get the healing off, whatever it is, it's still okay in a pinch. And I think that's really important. So Crystal Stag to me just looks like a fantastic card. It's going to be very powerful when it works. A lot of opportunity for this one to succeed in a big way. So up next here we have Mass Resurrection for Priest, a new 9 mana spell. Summon 3 friendly minions that died this game. And I'm a little sad to see Priest going back to more resurrect effects immediately, but I will say I think this one's a little bit weaker than things we've seen in the past, like the Spellstone, for a couple reasons. This does not say different minions, although there were some copies of this floating around, including one I discussed at length from like Hearthstone that did originally say that, but the final version doesn't say different minions, so you're not going to get unique entities all the time, which is a deck building restriction. If you want to get specific things, you can kind of only run those specific things. It's also 3 minions instead of 4, so there are less crazy opportunities to get all kinds of ridiculous combo pieces assembled. Beyond that, it costs 9 mana instead of 7. Now, obviously, it's more consistent than something like the Spellstone. When you top deck it, you don't have to upgrade it, for instance, like the Spellstone. But in a deck like that was all about combos and building this crazy resurrect pool, you were happy to take your time to survive until you kind of just won the game. I don't think Mass Resurrection provides that same sort of combo opportunity. Now, that said, it might still be viable to summon a bunch of big taunts in like a Wall Priest style deck, right? Just getting 3 big minions is going to be worth it for 9 mana sometimes. The question is, can you build your deck in a satisfying way where you don't run early game minions and make that a good sort of possible play? Or otherwise, you have to rely on the rules of RNG, and does that decrease the consistency so much that there are just better options? So to me, a card that will always have a little bit of potential because crazy combos exist, but a card that is probably kept in check most of the time and isn't nearly as impactful as other resurrect effects the Priest has had in the past because it's so much later in the game. You have less spare mana to work with. I really think most of the time this card probably doesn't see play, but will occasionally maybe pop into some crazy deck that just kind of lines it all up. So moving on here, I have Ray of Frost, a new twin spell for Mage at 1 mana. It reads, freeze a minion, and if it's already frozen, deal 2 damage to it. So this card's a little boring to me. We've seen this effect a lot. I don't know why they keep coming back to this, like freeze, or if it's frozen, kill it. It's yet another version. Now, Twin Spell does make it more interesting, I'll admit, so perhaps that's why they went this route. Like, oh, that's cool if you have Twin Spell, it finally makes sense. And it does, because you could use this as, you know, a stall effect, right? You can stall 2 different minions out with freeze, or you can stall the same minion out 2 turns in a row, so there are, you know, some advantages there. Freezing your opponent's Arch Thief Rafam so it can't hit you for 7 a couple turns in a row could be nice, right? Alternatively, if you get desperate and you have to deal 2 damage to a minion, like you can do that too to try to remove it. Now, 2 damage is just not that much, right? Like it's not going to be that impactful. I think the stall is more relevant, but even then, I just don't think that's a big enough thing for the kinds of decks that want to run this. The decks that want to stall and want to buy time probably just have bigger options and cooler things to be doing. Some pun intended. Bigger, better ways to freeze with blizzards or Cone of Colds. Like I know this almost gets to the same level as Cone of Cold, and it has a little bit more flexibility, but I don't think Cone of Cold's good. It doesn't get run. Blizzard is more universal. You know, it's just one of those big commitments. So I think this just falls short. There's not enough value. There's not enough impact. It just doesn't do quite enough to get there. The one alternative might be in a deck that just really likes running cheap spells and maybe wants to get a nice early board advantage like Vex Crow or Flame Waker in the past. Style synergies where just having a cheap 1-mana spell to empower that sort of stuff, or maybe to play with a Sorcerer's Apprentice looks really good, more of a tempo mage style. There's an opportunity for it there, but I still don't think it's going to be as good as the Mirror Images of the world and the Arcane Missiles. I think there will be better options to play. So to me, Ray of Frost probably just doesn't make the cut. So finally, one last card here, Mana Cyclone, a 2-mana 2/2 mage minion. It's an elemental with a battle cry that reads, for each spell you've cast this turn, add a random mage spell to your hand. And suddenly, there are previous cards looking a little more interesting, right? Because a lot of cheap spells can recycle into new spells with Mana Cyclone hitting the board. In a tempo mage deck with like a Sorcerer's Apprentice that's able to play a few cheap spells in a turn can turn that now empty hand into a hand full of more resources. Random cards aren't perfect. You won't always get cards that perhaps line up with your game plan, but you still get resources that allow you to stretch the game a little further. The question, I guess, for me is going to be, is a card like this going to help you follow a game plan in a substantial way? So if you're playing an aggressive tempo deck, is Mana Cyclone going to help you do that? Or would you rather just spend 2 more mana playing an aggressive, tempo deck? I think it's probably still going to work okay. You'll occasionally get things that just help you spend your mana. It's still a minion itself, so it has some aggression. The stats aren't terrible for a 2-drop, so playing it's not going to feel awful. Has elemental synergies as well. So there's a few different directions this card could go. I don't really see it as a control enabler. Often control decks are playing, 1 or 2 spells. Returning an extra spell to your hand might not be worth it for something like Mana Cyclone. But because it does so much, because it can generate a lot of potential resources, as soon as a tempo mage deck makes sense, Mana Cyclone will probably be a good fit for that style of deck. So I think this has a pretty high chance of being an impactful card at some point. So all that said, that wraps it up here for my detailed reviews. Now let's jump into the quick reviews. Commander Rhyssa is a 4-star card. Fel Lord Betrug is a 2-star card. Hecklebot is a 3-star card. Muck Morpher is a 3-star card. Sludge Slurper is a 3-star card. Crystal Power is a 3-star card. Crystal Stag is a 4-star card. Mass Resurrection is a 2-star card. Ray of Frost is a 2-star card. Mana Cyclone is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. Even more 2, 3, and 4-star cards. People are going to get mad. There's no 1s or 5s, but I got to rate them as I see them, and I just don't think there's a lot of 1s and 5s yet. Like, we're going to get there eventually. There'll be a couple more 5s. There will be some 1s that hit eventually, but most cards just don't fall in those spots. So if you have thoughts, if you have questions, of course, I want to see those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.